the combination of live action and animation goes way back to the silent days. We use models, of course, unlike Roger Rabbit and some of the other cartoons you see today. We use a dimensional model, which blends much more closely with the live action than a flat drawing, such as you saw in Mary Poppins. And of course, Willis O'Brien and The Lost World combined live action with the animation. And King Kong was the really his highlight of the combination. I wandered into Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood Boulevard some years ago in 1933 when I was tender age of 13, and I haven't been the same since. I was just found that this picture haunted me so that I had to find out how it was done. And when I found out about the glories of stop-motion animation, why, I started to experiment in my garage, and after that, it gradually developed from a hobby into a profession.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Brick Pit podcast you didn't know you didn't need, where we talk about movies, television, film, whatever comes in our mind. We are three guys with no real expertise, so of course we're on the internet spouting off our opinion. My name's Josh, and with me always is a man who is actually just a series of still photographs, Jason.
I can't answer. I'm just a series of still photographs.
He's actually 3 photographs in a trench coat.
And that other voice you heard was a man that thought stop motion was a command.
That's right.
Adam.
Glad to be here as always. Thanks for having me.
No, stop motion was the command that his wife gave him.
He's heard it from many ladies. So today I wanted to talk about a fun little thing. It's kind of we've talked about animation in the past, and this is under that umbrella, but essentially it's all the same. But I want to talk about stop motion, or claymation, as it's colloquially known in some places, like in Arkansas. I don't know if they're exclusive use of claymation.
I think that's essentially the motto of this podcast. I don't know.
Yeah, this may be somewhere in the realm of truth. we have a concept of the idea of truth.
Even a stop clock is right twice a day. We accidentally stumble upon truth.
Yes, we are the proverbial blind hogs. Before we talk in depth about like stop motion films, we will talk a little bit about how they're made and stuff, but most people are aware, especially if you listen to this podcast. But if not, then we'll give you, bird's eye view of, it's called motion pictures because every second a film is actually 24 individual frames or 30 FPS and is with video. And that's not tried and true as much anymore in the modern era, but typically, especially with actual film, persistence of vision kicks in right around 14 or 16, but 24 seems to be the sweet spot. It's the lowest point that gives you persistent motion. Basically, our eyes can't keep up with the individual photos at that point, so it gives the illusion of movement, and there's billions of dollars are generated because of that little quirk of nature.
Can we take a quick detour? I got a quick question if you have an opinion on the difference between 60 and 100, because I don't know if it's so much this case these days, but there used to be a huge price delta between a projector that could produce 100 FPS versus one that, and especially at home, that one that could 60. And there was a lot of chatter on the internet about like the human eye really can't tell the difference in that.
Well, yeah. And so the frames per second debate falls into two areas. There is watching motion pictures or television or whatever, and then there's gaming. And right, they actually express themselves a little bit different because the FPS in gaming is more about the refresh rates. I read an article on it a while back. It's less to do with the persistence of vision, and it has to do with rendering speeds.
Okay.
In 3D environments, there is a demonstrable difference between 30 frames per second, 60, 100 in gaming. As far as film goes, you certainly, if you've ever seen something in 60, it looks way different.
Yeah. Between 30 and 60, I could see the difference. But
Yeah.
I'm not even sure I could perceptibly tell on a film between 60 and
I think
100.
there's diminishing returns at a certain point, because it's like again, like you can, if you do like a flip book, you can go 12, 14 frames per second and get that illusion, but it's choppy. It's
Right.
24 is kind of a good solid state. And again, it's like the low point, which is why it became standard, because they didn't have to waste as much film or have higher consistent speeds in the camera. So it's really just a function of budgetary reasons in a lot of ways why 24 became the standard. Like in the early days of film, it wasn't. It kind of just coalesced at 24. And 24 is still, like I said, it is kind of at the threshold, which gives almost like a dreamlike quality to film, which to me enhances the experience. But that gets into the kind of Jungian psychoanalysis of film that we've gotten into before. But anyway,
There's no higher frame rate than 24.
24 is the highest frame rate. But what's interesting, and especially as we talk about stop motion, animation is it's the same thing. It's 24 pictures. It's just 2D drawings, with staged movement that they take picture after picture after picture. So stop motion, it just uses 3D models, whether they're made of clay or they're puppets or whatever, but they take the picture, move it a little bit, take the picture. But what that does, and what I think a lot of CGI kind of fills in for now, is things like motion blur.
Mm-hmm.
There is a big debate online about like motion smoothing technology and stuff like that. Motion blur is a weird thing because it's like you can perceive it yourself, like if you wave your hand in front of your face. But like with stop motion, you're getting that clarity of movement. And so, and as frame rates increase, you lose that motion blur. That's some of what makes it look unreal and why people don't like it. I think some of the more modern stop motion actually digitally adds in some stuff like that.
There's some processes. Phil Tippett, who we'll talk a lot about, who we've talked about before because of the amazing things he's done. One of the things he did was create what's called Go Motion. And that is computer-assisted stop-motion animation. And the reason he did that was to create that motion blur.
And it definitely makes a huge difference, whether you consciously realize it or not. Again, like with the computer assist and like being able to program through a panning shot or a tracking shot to have that automatic movement of the camera that's all... So you just got to go and change it and the camera sets itself and you don't get quite shakiness. So like technology has evolved to make the films look much better. I mean, I've been a fan of stop motion. I really like it, but some of it is almost indistinguishable from CGI.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask about that because, so first, just a general observation of all the forms of animation. I think this is typically my least favorite for the reasons that you mentioned, and I think it's mostly because of the Gumby experience. To put that out there, like
Gumby's... Do not come on our podcast and talk ill of Gumby or Mr. Bill.
Because of Gumby and Mr. Bill, which ruined stop motion.
Specifically.
Those two. No,
hold on. First of all, Mr. Bill was not stop motion.
It was in camera motion.
Yeah.
That's fair.
There's like 4 people left in the world outside this podcast that remember Mr. Bill.
Look it up. It's brilliant.
God bless Mr. Bill.
Oh, no.
Both Gumby and Mr. Bill were a little bit before my time, but I was peripherally aware of them. A lot of the stop motion stuff that came out later, like Chicken Run or the other things we've talked about, I just thought it could have been done better. I don't know. That animation style just has like an uncanny valley feel to me.
Sure.
But one of the movies we're talking about tonight changed my perception of that entirely.
Well, yeah, so that studio in particular is leagues ahead. It's the Rolls Royce of stop motion animation. You should check out all their films.
I do want to say that Adam was peak internet. I know nothing about this, but I think it could be done better.
That's 100%.
I mean, that's 100% the human condition.
Right. Well, yeah. It's like I forget who the comedian who's like people who complain about flying. Like, you're in a steel tube floating through the air. What could you possibly have to complain about right now? This is a miracle. How dare you be upset right now? Or like the people who like lose Wi-Fi on an airplane. And they're like, you didn't even know this existed 10 minutes ago, and now you're mad you don't have it? Another thing is I hate Tim Burton so much that the first thing I think of when I think of stop motion animation or claymation or any of that is Nightmare Before Christmas.
Which he did not direct.
Right, but it's Tim Burton's Nightmare Before. Yeah. But then actually, looking into this, so Henry Selick, who did Coraline and all the other...
And Coraline is fantastic.
And James and the Giant Peach, and like I guess this is like his medium or something.
So we're probably not going to talk about James and the Giant Peach tonight, but I do want to point this out that my kids love James and the Giant Peach, and to me, it is like it has one of those juxtapositions that just like breaks my head because it's like very Tim Burton-esque visuals. But then it's got a Randy Newman soundtrack,
yes.
And it's just like it is so incongruent and like such a bit because it was made at a time like where they're like Toy Story, so they're like, let's get Randy Newman. He's like, James and the Giant Peach. But it looks like the sandworms from Beetlejuice. It's just
I just don't like any of that. I just don't like that vibe, honestly. I mean, it's just not my thing. So there's not been a large pantheon of stop motion that I can draw from to think, oh, well, that's something I'd really like to watch again.
Mm-hmm. You don't watch Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer every Christmas?
I don't like any of those. I don't like those 1960s and 70s claymation stuff for Christmas either. Like, I just don't like it. I don't like the way it looks. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. It actually makes my skin crawl watching that stuff. There's just it is like the uncanny valley to me. It's like, this looks not quite right, and I can't quite figure out why it makes me uncomfortable, but it just honestly does.
You're an avowed communist, then.
Well, I mean, yes, but that has nothing to do with this.
In addition to that, I also don't like Rudolph. They're mutually exclusive, but they are
Santa
both
Claus
true.
is the epitome of communism. How could you buy If anything, it would be weird that I don't like that if I was a communist.
He does wear red. So.
What I heard isn't that Adam hates Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, is that he hates Christmas.
That is what I heard.
Okay.
He's an anti-religious communist.
There's the quote. You put that on there's the description for the episode.
That'll be on our billboard in Times Square.
There's no such thing as bad press.
Said somebody who doesn't understand press.
Talk to Bill Cosby about that. I bet you there's some headlines. He was like, oh, no. Oh, no. Wow. It's the only time I can do my Bill Cosby impersonation. To put the charges on the paper. Wow. Dio. It's the rest of the podcast is just going to be bad Cosby impersonations, and nobody will get mad because
nobody's listening.
Well, there are 7 people that are listening right now.
They're all our NSA handlers, yeah.
Yeah. We each have 2.
And there's a floater around for some reason.
He swing shifts.
He's the intern getting coffee, and I got a degree in national security to save America. Here I'm listening to these knuckleheads podcasts.
Stop motion's been around as long as film itself. I mean, you can go back to like the zoetropes and like and all the kind of like Nickelodeons and things that basically, flip books like we mentioned. It's all the same principle. One of the first stop motion films produced was one in 1898 called Humpty Dumpty's Circus. Where they used dolls that had articulated appendages and they had them do acrobatics and stuff. It is a lost film. There are not even any stills left of it. Somebody remembered it. It was awesome. It was like the most awesome movie ever. It's gone. But and again, we've talked about that in film preservation, how much just disappeared. But it's interesting that from the beginning, this style and this melding with live action has been around for a very long time as well. Was it the Lost World that had the dinosaurs?
Yeah.
And
it's essentially a special effects technique.
mm-hmm.
Because there were a lot of also previous silent films that used that frame by frame motion to
Right.
Georges Méliès that we've talked about before, the French filmmaker and stage musician and everything, used a lot of stop motion in his short films because he was very much an early pioneer of not just cinema but special effects. I think we're really used to seeing stop motion without understanding that it's stop motion a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like I said, it's a widely used special effect technique, and it's only really noticeable a lot of times by people when it's the puppetry or animation, things like that. Because there's a lot of versions of it. The South Park crew, their first stuff was stop motion, technically, because it was pieces of cut-out cardboard, and they would move it bit by bit instead of an actual animated or done in computer as it's done now, which is essentially a digital version of stop motion, since they use essentially an armature, a 3D skeleton.
And a lot of 3D animation is these principles. It's just all done in the computer. What's fascinating about the Pixar films and stuff is that not only do they develop skeletal models that they can position, but that they have developed actual lenses for their virtual cameras to get different effects. It's basically just digitizing the whole process.
I think probably a really famous quote on that is probably going to mention a little bit more later on, but Ray Harryhausen, who's a big name in the stop motion field, a lot of people in CG animation give him credits we're essentially doing what Ray Harryhausen did, but in a computer.
So the Lost World and King Kong, it was Willis O'Brien who pioneered a lot of that, and then along came Harryhausen, whose big film was Mighty Joe Young, which is basically King Kong.
Miniature King Kong.
Sure. You're more of a Harryhausen scholar than I am. Is there anything?
Yet again, another low bar.
Well, sure. But but like I said, Harryhausen is if you don't know the name, you know the work. He was very much a pioneer, and he is one of the giants. Mostly, I think we want to talk more about fully stop motion films, but he was more of a mixed media kind of guy. Yeah.
It was more in the special effects realm. He did a lot of creature films, especially in the 50s, stuff like The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms. I think he also did some alien invasion special effects stuff, which Tim Burton also kind of homaged in Mars Attacks.
Mm-hmm. Dude, do not come in here and talk about Mars Attacks like that. I don't really like Tim Burton either, but when he's good, man. I don't want to get into this.
I can't have this fight again, Adam.
It's like having a podcast with my brother's kids, man.
We're in our 15th year of marriage, and I can't have this fight again. It's just we're just gonna have to agree to disagree.
Just get in the car and let's go home.
We'll talk about it in the car. We'll talk about it in the car, not in front of everybody else.
You're embarrassing me in front of the audience, Adam. You always do this. You have too much hard cider, and you start talking about Tim Burton. Ruin the evening.
Don't get him riled up.
Anyway, Jason, as you were saying.
But he also did a lot of fantasy stuff, especially based off mythology. Sinbad, Jason the Argonauts. And his last big hurrah was Clash of the Titans.
Oh, yeah.
Because he kind of felt like his version of stop motion was essentially going by the wayside. By that point, Phil Tippett had created the Go Motion, which was computer assisted.
Right. I mean, but he was older at that point, too.
Yeah.
And I think it was, he saw the writing on the wall that, And what's great about Harryhausen, though, is that there's a lot of people that are pioneers that never get their due. I think he was always held in high regard because,
people called them Harryhausen movies, even though he technically wasn't the director. He just did the stop motion. Some other dude did like 80% of the movie, but they're Harryhausen films.
I mean, they are. Clash of the Titans would not be what it is without the Kraken and Calabas and, all just, and Jason and the Argonauts. Like, everybody knows the skeletons,
And often repeated.
It launched 1,000
infamous.
Dungeons and Dragons campaigns. I watched that and I was like, all right, I want to go to the bookstore, get some 20-sided dice.
And sell my soul to the devil. Play at D&D.
Just like Ray Harryhausen wanted. In reality, he'd be like, what? It's Dungeons and Dragons. What are you doing? What are you doing? You're a nerd. So yeah, that's pretty good stuff. Any other technical aspects you want to chime in on before we start talking in particular, or?
No, I think that pretty much does. Like I said, there's no one version of stop motion. There's a multitude of it. We've talked about stop motion films before of different kinds. I mentioned before Fantastic Planet, which looks like cell animation, but it isn't, and it's closer to, like I said, the early South Parks. It's actually bits of paper and everything and other media cut out and manipulated bit by bit over each frame. I've always had affinity for animation. We've talked a lot about animation here before. I think that probably is because animation is, like, at its core, an exposure of the lie of film, which is what you talked about earlier, is the fact that film isn't motion. It is a series of still images projected in a manner in which tricks the brain into believing that there's motion.
It's an exploitation of the limitation of this meat machine we call man.
Yes.
I want that on my grave. That's an interesting point too, but I also think that animation is able to aggrandize feelings and emotions and concepts, like abstract them but still keep them grounded through anthropomorphized creatures, so it opens up. When you take away the shell of a person and have this more representation, it opens up the internal world a little bit more. And like I said, we've talked about stop motion films in passing or particular films in the past, but a lot of people seem to think of them as kids' movies. And the same, we've talked about that with animation, but it is an art form and it can be at any level. Certainly there's a lot of stop motion animation that's out there that is just for children. There's a lot that is more for all general audiences, which I think is neglected. Not necessarily family films, but just for whoever.
I think it's just, we're talking from an American-centric point of view, which does consider
it's the only point of view that matters, son.
It does consider animation more childish. Whereas if you look, especially like Japan or France, there is more of an acceptance of animation as an art form to be enjoyed at any age. So, I mean, that's a cultural norm that I wish did not exist, because there's a lot of really good artistic people making great animation, both cell and stop motion and CG, that we just don't open ourselves up to. And we're going to talk about some really good examples of that tonight. So listen up, listeners.
One of the issues why you don't get many stop motion films is it's an incredibly tedious process. Even with all the advances we've made in technology, it is still the manipulation of physical objects one shot at a time that takes dedication and precision and time. They are very difficult films to make. So to kind of just dismiss them, Adam, as...
You're confusing dismissal with
derision.
I demand you like the things I like. I mean, isn't that what life is about? Is demanding people to enjoy the things you enjoy and hate
Everyone
the things
thinks
you hate?
their way is the best. That's yeah. No, so that's actually the point I was going to make earlier was that what I was trying to drive at is that I don't understand economically. Like, it has to be super labor intensive. Like, I know very little about it. I mean, I intuitively understand. I've seen some how do they make these things type behind the scenes videos. Like, I'll tell you who my favorite stop motion director is Ben Wyatt from Parks and Rec. I don't know if you've seen that. I don't know if you remember that episode where he's unemployed and he decides he's going to make a stop motion film and he works for weeks and then he's like, okay, I've been working for weeks on this. Let's watch it. And it's like 19 seconds of work. You know, with that knowledge in mind, I don't understand the economics of it. I don't understand how it achieves parity with, say, 3D animation or CGI.
Well, that's one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of them. And the people that are involved in them are incredibly passionate. I think you'll find more...
Is this like a vinyl CD type thing? Like, it exists because it's a purer form?
What is a vinyl CD?
Vinyl versus CD.
It is much more of a... on the art side of things. And so I don't want to say the word like auteur. I don't know if I would go that far, but it is certainly due to the mechanics involved in creating the models and then filming them and stuff that it is much more of an art form in and of itself. So to be involved in that, I don't think I've ever, well, I say this, and then I'm going to talk about a film where I think that the exact opposite of this is true. I don't think that people get involved into this style of filmmaking unless they're incredibly passionate about it.
This is like an autistic's dream. Like, you know what I mean? It's like model trains or something. Like, there's definitely a place for it, and I appreciate it as an art form. I honestly do. I actually think it's a cool thing that people have figured out how to do, and that it's existed since 1898 in its continuous form. Having said all that, with the exception of the new stuff that I was introduced to, and I wish I had time to watch more of the recommendations on the list tonight. But what I'm trying to say is that as a casual observer, the output does not equal the effort to me. Right? If somebody told me that I had to do this as a job, like, you're going to create stop motion animation as like forced labor, Adam. That's your I'd be like, this makes no sense. Why does this exist? Like,
I think we've also found in discussions with you outside the podcast that you're lazy.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, but I think also you can say that about anything that you don't have passion. Like, if you don't really like music, 100%. And somebody's like, you're going to play bass every night, and you're like, oh, I hate the bass. Like,
yeah. No, that's a fair point. I mean, I'm not passionate about painting either, right? Or like, I like going to an art museum and then, looking at, Dutch Impressionists or whatever. But if somebody told me, okay, well, you're going to become an Impressionist painter for the rest of your life and you have no choice, and this is your job now, I'd be like, yeah, okay, fine. But if you told me I was going to have to do this tedious work of stop motion, I don't think I could. So
what I get from that is that you have less respect for Monet than you do for Ray Harryhausen, because his job's more difficult.
I have less respect for Tim Burton.
All right. I want to start light, and then, because I think this discussion will kind of delve into some fairly serious topics. Some of the films we've chosen are not, there's a lot to them. But I want to talk about probably my favorite stop motion, and it is claymation, and that is the Aardman series of films and shorts of Wallace and Gromit. In particular, I'd like to talk about the short, The Wrong Trousers.
Get up and get ready for an incredible Academy Award-winning adventure. It's a hilarious comedy that your whole family is going to love. Meet Wallace and Gromit, two friends who are about to confront an evil penguin. A unique pair of pants. Face adventure. Thrills. And most of all, laughs. And the critics love it. A small masterpiece. A brand new classic. A unique brand of filmmaking. Brilliantly funny. you and your family will want to watch The Wrong Trousers again and again.
Help me! It's the wrong trousers, Gromit.
The Academy Award-winning The Wrong Trousers, wherever video is sold.
Sorry!
To which I believe a sequel is about to be released, I think on Netflix or something, but I'm like super stoked about because one of the greatest villains of all time ever put to film is in The Wrong Trousers. So Wallace and Gromit is Aardman Animation Studios. It's a goofy English dude and his dog. As the tropes are, he is clueless and the dog is the one that takes care of business. Very Charlie Brown-esque kind of dynamics between the two. They are really clever and funny, lots of sight gags. And there was a series of shorts, I think that one of them won an Oscar. But the Wrong Trousers, he's an inventor and he creates these pants. It's robot legs to automatically take his dog on a walk because he's too lazy to do it.
A man after my own heart.
And money's tight, so they have to rent out. Gromit is the dog and Wallace is the dude. They have to rent out Gromit's room, and they rent it out to this penguin. It's such a fantastic use of the Kuleshov effect because since it's just this inanimate object, there's these long moments of it just like staring like at Gromit because the penguin's evil and Wallace is too dumb to figure it out, but he slowly like insinuates himself into their. It's like shades of a single white female. Like he starts trying to replace Gromit. Why Gromit ends up in a doghouse in the back. The penguin's like putting up his own. It's going from like dog treats to fish wallpaper, and he's constantly listening to like polka music that's like really annoying.
Where did I first see? Because I have a memory of seeing all the Wallace and Gromit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we can't tell you where you first saw something. No, that's not how memories work.
It was pre-streaming and it wasn't on TV. But these were short.
It was Academy Award-winning.
Yeah, but these were short. Like, were they shown in theaters like before movies? Like, how did I? Like, I know I've seen. There's a whole bunch of these.
Nickelodeon showed some too.
Maybe so.
Yeah, as specials.
Maybe that's it. Yeah, I don't recall. I remember. I don't remember when I saw them, but it's just kind of like it's in that cultural vault. You know, like I know all the stories. I remember the thing that the Uncanny Valley part of it for me was when Gromit cries, the way they do tears in Wallace and Gromit. That was the thing that gave me the heebie-jeebies. just for the record, the
emotions made me uncomfortable.
Anytime Gromit cries, you should get the heebie-jeebies.
It's the way they made the tears. The
tears do not come easy.
In claymation, is that the...
No,
from dogs. Dogs don't have tear ducts.
In any case, that was the stories were good. I remember really enjoying the laughs. And,
so to finish the story, the penguin is actually noted criminal Feathers McGraw, and he puts on a red glove on his head so people think he's like a rooster. And it's like it's one of those things. It's like that's so stupid and brilliant at the same time. There's absolutely fantastic chase sequence where they're on a toy train, like little train set, and they're running out of track, and Gromit's like throwing down the track to keep the thing from going off course. And it has shades of like the Great Train Robbery and stuff. It's just an amazing sequence. It's the Odessa step sequence of claymation. And more than that, it's just fun. And it's one of those things that, like, from 9 to 99, you'll have a good time with Wallace and Gromit. Playing now at your Cineplex.
That's a half-decent Casey Kasem.
I wasn't going for Casey Kasem.
That's my point, too.
Yeah, that was generic morning radio guy. You're listening to the Wild Bunch at 99.7.
I propose that we do all future episodes with that voice, Josh. That should all that's your new podcasting voice.
I think all Wallace and Gromit films are just great. They're fun.
Mm-hmm.
They don't take themselves too seriously. They express themselves very well, I think, as far as the art of the animation and the figures and everything. And you're right, they do come up with some really great villains. But yes, the penguin disguising himself as a rooster is probably one of the greatest sight gags ever.
Yeah, I mean, it really is just like, if you can't find joy in this, like, and I'm like a pretty broken, bitter person, and I'm like just unequivocally like, oh yeah, I love Wallace and Gromit. Like it's pure. It is untainted. And all of the films are great. The studio, they did Pirates, which is really good. They did Chicken Run. They've had plenty of hits, but Wallace and Gromit, and they had some Xbox like point and click adventures of Wallace and Gromit, and even those were, it's like on the Xbox 360 way back then. My wife and I, when we were first married, like would play that, like, and they were just so fun. They lived up to the animation and just quality, which is rare.
Aardman did a lot of really good stuff, and it's not the same guy who did Wallace and Gromit, but the same umbrella of the Aardman Studios.
Mm-hmm.
They did a lot of stuff. Like, I know one of the shorts that got a lot of attention was essentially like interviewing zoo animals.
Yeah.
They also did, I think it was either Exxon or Chevron. I think it was Chevron commercials in like the late 90s, early 2000s of like the cars talking about how great Chevron gas is. But
So like the studio has a very, and I think most studios, especially animation studios, have a look and
house
it's
style.
and it's the kind of like really wide teeth and big mouths, and it's just quintessentially too, just it's a very British, like unapologetic. As an Anglophile, I appreciate that.
Are you a registered Anglophile?
In Alabama, if you were an Anglophile, you have to be registered. You have to notify everyone in your neighborhood. Just in case there needs,
He's just watching old episodes of Are You Being Served? Nothing to worry about here, folks.
I think they're afraid that England's going to try to take the colonies back, so you have to be registered. So yeah, that is absolutely, of the early kind of like shorts, the Wrong Trousers is probably my favorite. I think later on they did
Curse of the Were-Rabbit.
Curse of the Were-Rabbit was like a feature length film. It was in theaters and had like, who played the villain in that? It was guy played Voldemort. Oh, so Ray Fiennes, and he was really good in that. And then there was a Matter of Loaf and Death, which I think went straight to DVD. Just absolutely hilarious. It's the plot is this woman. She was the Bakelite girl. She was the I'm light as a feather and the Bakelite girl. She'd float away on this balloon. She was like this young and beautiful woman that, she was like the mascot for like these bread products. And she ate so much she became overweight. So she starts murdering bakers. And part of the conceit of Wallace and Gromit is like every movie or short, they're on some other grift trying to make money. So in this one, they've opened a bakery. So he gets targeted by the Bakelite girl. Like she like kind of Black Widows him. She marries him and murders him. I mean, it's not graphic. It's like a Hitchcock film.
Yeah.
I was watching my kids when they were really young. She's like, she murdered them. She murdered the hell out of them.
Just like I'm going to do to you tonight.
That's right.
You don't go to bed on time.
But that's I can't speak highly. I think, what was it? There was one where it was like early man or something, was
Cavemen or something like that.
Yeah, it wasn't terrible, but it was like,
it didn't reach the level of the others.
Right. Had it been another studio, I probably would have enjoyed it more, but that's the problem with kind of being successful and having a name. It's like cars or planes is be a good example.
This is what we suffer from as our podcast. It's our early successes have overshadowed our later years.
Our early successes of 14 listeners.
Never could I imagine that I could disappoint 14 people, but here we are.
When I was a kid, I used to tell people I want to grow up and disappoint as many people as possible, and that's how I became a podcaster.
I want a microphone that goes out to the whole world so I can spout uneducated opinions.
Honest to God, can you imagine going back in time and you're sitting in a parlor with Benjamin Franklin and you're trying to explain the concept of the middle-aged white guy podcast to him? And he's like, you're doing what? You can talk to everyone in the world and you're doing what?
He would ask how it would be able to get him to be amorous with old ladies.
That's true. That's 100%
He would have a pretty nasty podcast.
Can you meet women there?
Yeah, he'd pretty much love the internet then.
Yeah. You're listening to Guy Diliberto, and we have...
Ben Franklin as a morning drive time host, a radio host.
Morning drive-by.
Ben Franklin today would be like a pickup artist, but for MILFs. And he would have a reality TV show, and we would all still be British. So
He'd have a Pornhub channel. Is what he'd have.
He'd be Howard Stern. That's who he'd be.
You're listening to Hanging Brain with Ben Frank.
I discovered electricity, and I'm bringing it to you live.
And immediately moved to electric sex pants. There's at least one listener out there that has I won't say irrational hatred of Benjamin Franklin, but he doesn't have a high opinion of him. So, Mr. Chalmette,
as a non sequitur, since this is a show ostensibly about movies and TV, I've recently been watching that Apple TV Plus show Franklin. It stars Michael Douglas as Benjamin Franklin. I've really enjoyed it. Just as an aside, it's very slow stakes.
I thought he was playing Franklin the Turtle. The Hey It's Franklin. a gritty reboot of Hey It's Franklin.
Franklin.
I was about to be offended. I thought he was doing the Peanuts character, and I was like, wait a minute.
Michael Douglas as Charles M. Schultz as Franklin. a reimagining of a classic. Okay. Well, it's been a great podcast. We've been canceled now, but now
people have to listen to cancel us.
That's true.
C. Thomas Howell is Pigpen. I'm a dirty MFer. All right. So, Jason, I really, really want to talk about one of your films and then talk about a counterpoint, and then we'll probably be out of time after that. But
you don't want to talk to Adam at all about his choices? All right. Yeah, just leave him alone.
Adam said he didn't watch any movies.
I didn't really have any choices. Yeah, sorry. I actually didn't watch that, and we already talked about the other one. So
his notes say Henry Selick, and he said Henry Selick. So he's
he's good.
What I was going to say about that is I thought I don't like stop motion, but it turns out I just don't like Henry Selick. But
mostly because I thought he was Tom Selleck's brother. Turns out that's not true at all.
They're not even spelled the same.
Who's he trying to deceive?
I'm so stupid.
My first choice is a great film. I'm just all right. It's a good film. It is Kubo and the Two Strings.
Kubo! Can you hear me, Kubo? Your village is burned to the ground. Your enemies aren't far behind. We need to go now. You have questions, I can tell.
Who?
You get 3.
Why only 3?
Okay, that was your first question.
What? I don't understand what's happening.
This is the beginning of your story. Your family is very powerful. Your mother used her magic to save you.
Kubo, run!
And bring me to life.
What are we gonna do?
We're going to find your father's armor. It's the only thing that can protect you.
Many years ago, I was cursed. This great adventure is my destiny.
Your magic is growing stronger. You need to learn control. Show off.
My father's fortress. This way!
Claim your birthright, Kubo. Give this story a happy ending.
If you must blink. Do it now.
Now, this is from Leica Studios. They have a very almost Pixar approach to filmmaking, which is that a lot of them are kind of slightly tilting the scales toward children, but they have adult themes, and as far as, you know, actual just like mature concepts of philosophy or ideology and stuff like that that goes through them. And Kubo is probably the strongest in that category. It reminds me a lot of Up.
Oh yeah, that's
from
fair.
Pixar.
Yeah.
I had never heard of this movie or seen it before, and I'm so grateful to you for recommending it, Jason, honestly.
It is art.
Yes.
And Leica, they did Coraline, and they also did Paranorman.
Yeah.
And Paranorman, I know we're probably not going to talk about it, but that is worthwhile. It's really underrated in there.
It's actually not a bad movie either, now that you mention it, yeah.
I really enjoyed Paranorman.
Yeah. They also did the Box Trolls.
Yes.
Which is another
That was what I,
which
so
is like
for the
one of my
record, that was
kids'
what I was going to watch,
favorite
but I didn't get a
films.
chance to.
But Kubo, I think, is their high water mark. So go ahead and Jason.
It most definitely is. It is something that they had never tried before, but I think they did a very good job of it. It's both an epic fantasy, but it's also set in Japan, so it takes a lot of Japanese culture along with it. And they also had, you know, like George Takei and Kari Hiroshima Tagawa. Not gonna mispronounce his name.
Charlize Theron and Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah. Great Asian actors, Charlize Theron, Matthew McConaughey, and Ray Fiennes in the main roles.
If Michael Douglas could play Franklin, then
Yeah, exactly. It's a really, really good movie about a child named Kubo who grows up with his mother outside this Japanese village. He goes in during the day and he plays his 3-string, essentially Japanese banjo. I believe it is called the shamisen. He tells stories as he plays, and through magic makes these paper origami figures come to life and tell the stories. But he never finishes the stories, and it's all these great, like, epic hero's journey type stories.
If you must blink, do it now. Pay careful attention to everything you see and hear, no matter how unusual it may seem. And please be warned, if you fidget, if you look away, if you forget any part of what I tell you, even for an instant, then our hero will surely perish. Hanzo was a mighty samurai, but he was alone. His family taken from him, his kingdom in ruins, and his army destroyed by the dreaded Moon King. You may recall, Hanzo was roaming the distant farlands in search of a magical suit of armor, the only weapon in the whole world that could protect him from the power of the Moon King. This armor was made up of 3 pieces. The first...
Oh, I know! The sword unbreakable!
The second...
The breastplate! Impenetrable.
And finally, the third weapon. The final piece of the armor.
I know this one. Pick me. The helmet invulnerable.
Before Hanzo could claim the armor and unite the pieces to reveal their true power, He was attacked by the Moon King's beasts.
And you find out it's the stories that his mother tells him about his father. And she is essentially almost like comatose during the day, but at night she kind of comes alive, but her memory's fading. He has to be home before night comes out because through her stories that she's telling him, she is the daughter of the Moon King. Her father took his left eye when he was born. Her sisters are kind of hunting them, so he has to be home before night falls so that her family doesn't find him and come looking for him again. And one night he actually stays a little bit longer because he finds out about the Japanese ritual of like lighting lanterns for the dead. He winds up staying out late and his family finds him again. And so it starts him on this journey to find these mystical like weapons and armor that his mother's been telling about and that he's been using in his story in order to protect himself from his grandfather and his aunts. And his mother essentially dies protecting him, and this little figurine of a monkey that she used as a talisman, told him to keep with him to protect him, comes alive and starts guiding him. And then he meets this giant beetle / samurai that joins the party, and they kind of go on the quest together. The underlying themes of the movie are essentially storytelling, for one, but also memory and how memory influences the stories we tell and our identities, who we are, and also how we keep family in our hearts after they're gone. I don't want to go too much into the actual story because it's a great experience to watch it with your family.
Right.
It is gorgeous. It is a gorgeous film to watch. This is one of those stop motion animation features that gets down into the detail. Like we mentioned Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer before. That was TV budget 60s, very cartoony and everything. This is more detailed. They have actual facial expressions. Everything moves on them, and there is a lot of great action sequences as well. It pulls a lot of influences from Japanese art, but also from like Miyazaki, to the great, anime film director at Studio Ghibli. It brings in a lot of his central like storytelling elements.
And also it's influenced by Kurosawa and and actual it is steeped in actual Japanese
mythos
and culture, and is done not as a gimmick and not even as a background. It's like from the ground up built around the culture.
Yes.
It's very respectful of that, and the reason I'm saying this is important for the upcoming discussion. But I think like that the Festival of Light or whatever, the film was actually released at the same time as the festival in real life. Although many of the people involved were not Japanese, it was still it's like that can be a touchy thing. I think it was handled very well, and
not from a position of appropriation, but from respect and admiration, I think is the way I would.
Yes, not gimmicky. And never do you think like it was set here just to be like, hey, let's make this different.
Yeah, it's not exploitative of Japanese culture.
No.
Right.
Like a lot of our favorite movies from the 80s were. You like ninjas? Here's some ninjas.
Yeah.
But it is very much, they did a deep dive into it because, like I said, they bring in a lot of art from Japan to influence the look, wood block carving stuff, ink wash stuff. Origami is a big aspect of it. It is a beautiful film. Like there's a lot of depth and everything to it that you don't get in a lot of other stop motion animation, and you don't get in 3D animation.
Right.
Yeah.
There is a feel of reality to it, even though it's animation, just because it's an actual 3D set. They did something that's quite remarkable because even though the figures aren't very big, they have to be big enough for the details to be caught on camera. And there is a sequence where they're fighting this giant skeleton. They were thinking about different ways to do it, and they was like, well, it's not going to look right if we shoot a skeleton that's basically the same and then kind of superimpose it on it. So they actually built like this 16-foot tall skeletal puppet.
Like, I mean, that's like Home Depot size skeleton.
Yes, with computer armature, a controlled armature to help out. You can find the behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's the largest stop motion piece ever made, and this I think at the time it was made, this was actually also the longest film.
Oh, interesting. So it felt like a real movie, if that makes sense. I mean, I don't mean to disparage like the artful. What I watched it cold. Like I didn't go read reviews of it. I didn't read.
That's fantastic. That's a great way to watch it.
And I watched it with my kid. It was enthralling, right? We were all interested in it. At times, for long stretches of the movie, I forgot that it was stop motion. Periodically, there would be some scenes where it was very clear. There were little things that you're like, oh, that's definitely stop motion. That's not CGI. There's an example that came to mind is they're on the lake and they have this big battle scene, and then afterwards, one of the central figures is a origami samurai that the boy conjures up, right? That's sort of a totem of his dad. And it gets smushed, and it looks like clay when it's smushed. It looks like Play-Doh rolled out. I stopped it, and I turned to my wife, and I said, that's the first time. It's not quite a brick pit, because the definition of brick pit is something that takes you out of the fantasy and brings you into the reality. But it was the first time in this movie that I had realized, that I remembered that, oh, yeah, they're actually doing this frame by frame, because it looked like clay, or it looked like, whatever. I hadn't seen anything like this before that was stop motion. This is what I was alluding to earlier when we were discussing this. This by itself has transformed the way I thought the medium could look in a very positive way. I loved this movie. I loved everything about it. I loved that it was stop motion. I think it wouldn't have worked as well as CGI because there's something about the way that, like you mentioned earlier, the depth of, you can create that. You can definitely, we are technologically capable of recreating this probably shot for shot in CGI, but there's something about the way the filmmakers chose to the angles that they did, the shots, the facial expressions they chose. There's a deliberativeness to it, I guess that's the word, that I think would be missed in CGI. I think that CGI gets rushed scene to scene, whereas this you have to slow down to do it. And so each shot matters.
It kind of plays into the, the practical effects versus CGI, and I think,
which I always prefer practical. Yeah.
Well, I think they have their place. I think there's a lot of things that people don't realize are CGI that are. It's usually like landscaping and back, but that's another issue. But a physical manifestation in the world has some kind of weight to it. Has our
But they did utilize CGI, but mostly for backdrops like the skies and stuff like that in the back. Like, this isn't really claymation, but they did have cutting edge 3D printers to use to create the models. It's like a company actually gave it to them to test out their latest technology and give them feedback on it. It's a joy to watch. Like, when Josh mentioned that he wanted to do this episode, like, this is the first movie that came to mind to me. And it's like one of those things, like, I have an excuse to watch this film.
This is the only reason I still do this podcast, is because you guys sometimes recommend movies I've never heard of, and they're transformative. And I really enjoy being forced to kind of go into that. To be fair, I would say if we were keeping a tally, I think Jason's views on film, his favorite movies tend to be really something that I actually enjoy too. Not that yours aren't great too, Josh, but you and I are less copacetic on that. But I just had a quick diversion I wanted to ask. Each of you studied film a little bit in college. You got movie school. Were you ever in a position where you did any kind of experimentation with stop motion? Was it something that came up in class?
Not stop motion per se, but I mean, we had an animation stand. You could do classic animation if you so choose. And actually,
one of our teachers was actually one of his college projects was an experimental animation film.
Yeah. So, but I do remember one of our friends' films. She basically kind of like a music video, but like there's a scene where a drunk driver hits a kid on a car. So the way that we shot that was took a bunch of photographs of the kid, on the car, and then kind of reversed it and use the animation table to shoot it in reverse sequence and give it kind of a jerky, like pseudo animation look, and it worked really well.
Do you think this art form is dying, or do you think this is something they still teach in film school? Or
I didn't plan on talking about this, but this did remind me of. Do you guys know who Joel Haver is?
The name doesn't ring a bell for me.
Okay, so he's just like a dude. He like us, but
how the hell would we know who he is? Why even ask that question?
Because he's got a huge YouTube channel.
Oh, okay.
But he went to film school. He's done some animation. I think I showed you guys the Sand Planet. It's like Uncle Owen's like, oh yeah, here come the droids being sold. I think I act like I'm above it, but I'm not. No, it was kind of rotoscope animation.
Okay.
So anyway, I enjoy his stuff. It's pretty funny. But he this year he'd been doing a lot of shorts, and he said he wanted to push himself. So he decided that he was going to do 12 full-length movies in a year. And another thing that he did was like not really protest to the Oscars, but I mean, kind of he was like, instead of watching the Oscars, shoot a film and then let's upload it during while the Oscars are playing. And he shot a film that's all like looks like a single take. That's really good. It's it's obviously no budget. I'm like, man, that's a worthwhile pursuit instead of watching the Oscars. And what a cool thing. But anyway, he released one of his films for this 12 feature films in 12 months. Came out, I think, 2 months ago, and it's called Hello, My Beautiful Creatures. And it is a stop motion film, and it is very basic. It took him 2 months to do, and it is very much like very little animation to it.
Right. Ben Wyatt and Parks and Rec.
It's dark. So it's like right up my alley. It's very interesting. It's very DIY. It's worth checking out. Hello, My Beautiful Creatures. Just check out Joel Haver. It's hit or miss. So you ask if the art form is dying. It's like, I think as long as there's people like that out there that are willing to do it, it may not be Kubo levels, but I think that it will.
There are people with the passion for it that are going to keep it alive.
Yeah. I mean, I guess model trains are never going away either, right? I mean, there's certain things that are just going to have a niche audience.
And as cinema dies, I think that, honestly, I think it's certainly diminishing. I think the golden era is finally over. Speaking of things becoming like vinyl, I think that's the track we're on. But there are people out there that on YouTube and stuff like that, and like Joel Haver to me is one of these people that's like, hey, I want to make movies. I don't have a lot of money, but I want to make movies. I want to do what I can, and I'm not going to do it in a studio system. I'm just going to do it at home and put it out there. Like, there's a bravery to that, and there's like, it's like that. You're better than me because I sit here and just bitch about movies,
everything.
Yeah.
I do think there is a lot of, it's not quite as a big thing now, but I remember like in the 2000s, there was a thing that you could buy for your kids. And it was essentially kind of like the little wood models for artists that you can pose to get like the everything.
Yeah, but the little clay figurines, that you put clay on. They're made out of wood, but you can,
Yeah. They had these little figurines and they had it where the little green screen and the kids could make their own little stop motion animation. That affected, Josh and I have a friend whose oldest son got into stop motion, and like he was making good stuff just by himself with his little camera in his bedroom at like 12 years old.
Speaking of which, also this is pre-YouTube. My old college roommate, you remember Sean? His little brother made some, we're in film school, and he was in high school. He's like, look, I got this VHS of this stuff my brother made. And we're like, okay, we'll watch it. It was stop motion, really rudimentary because, using a home video camera of his G.I. Joe toys. He was doing stuff it reminded me of Spielberg when he was a kid, having the
stepping on the stick,
stepping on the dirt
up to look like an explosion.
Yeah. It was really good, and he's doing these almost Apocalypse Now kind of things, but it's Chucklehead from G.I. Joe. It was absolutely amazing. I think that it will stick around in some form because...
Yeah, like puppetry and everything.
Yeah.
There's always going to be people who are fascinated these art forms that are going to keep it alive. Barbershop quartets and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It might not be as mainstream as it is now, but I think it's always going to survive.
Yeah, so Kubo is fantastic. I want to transition to that and kind of talk about the other side of that. This week, my daughter, and this was the genesis of this episode, my 14-year-old said, I want to watch a movie. If you have teenage children, anytime they want to do anything with you, you take that opportunity, right? Because they're few and far between. They're at that age where they don't want anything to do with you.
That's how Adam wound up robbing a convenience store last week.
Anything to spend
They were
time.
reenacting Raising Arizona.
It's not a felony if you're a minor.
I was like, what do you want to watch? And she said, Isle of Dogs.
The Japanese archipelago, 20 years in the future. Canine saturation has reached epidemic proportions. An outbreak of dog flu rips through the city of Megasaki. Mayor Kobayashi issues emergency orders, calling for a hasty quarantine. Trash Island becomes an exile colony. The Isle of Dogs.
I don't think I can stomach any more of this garbage.
Exactly. Same here. Words out of my mouth. Nobody's giving up around here, and don't you forget it, ever. You're Rex. You're King. You're Duke. You're Boss. I'm Chief. We're a pack of scary, indestructible alpha dogs.
Atari Kobayashi, you heroically hijacked a junior turboprop XJ750 and flew it to the island because of your dog. Darn it. I've got a crush on you.
We get the idea. You're looking for your lost dog Spots. Does anybody know him?
No.
I've lost all of my pride.
Spots, if he's alive, may very well be living even at this moment as a captive prisoner.
Somebody is up to something. Will you help him? The little pilot.
Why should I?
Because he's a 12-year-old boy. Dogs love those.
We'll find him. Wherever he is, if he's alive, we'll find your dog.
It's gonna be a fight.
I wish somebody spoke his language.
Wow. To the north, a long rickety causeway over a noxious sludge marsh leading to a radioactive landfill polluted by toxic chemical garbage. That's our destination.
Great.
Got it. Get ready to jump.
And I internally screamed because this is a Wes Anderson stop motion film. And we all know that I hate Wes Anderson. What's funny is the day before at work, Wes Anderson came up, and I was going on a tirade, and I said that since maybe Rushmore, I had not voluntarily seen a Wes Anderson film, and they were all like, oh, and then so the next day, I'm involuntarily again watching a Wes Anderson film.
Just imagine if Tim Burton and Wes Anderson got together and created a stop motion film. It would be.
That's like the seventh seal.
That's why Sauter could not create a better hell for me. That would be.
So let me talk about this film because what was interesting, and I won't do like a compliment sandwich where I do something nice and then the critiques and then something nice. I'll do like an open-faced sandwich. I'll do something nice and then I'm going to pile all the complaints on top of it. And when this isn't Wes Anderson's first stop motion film, he did the Fantastic Mr. Fox, which I did not see. But his artistic style, his eye, does lend itself better to animation and stop animation than
I'll agree with you strongly.
real life. So, like, visually, it works. It really works, and it looks fine. You know, it like, I get it, that context. Real people, I don't think it worked. But I will say this. If you would have asked me if stop motion could be pretentious before I watched that film, I would say no. It can be very pretentious. But what I was not expecting was it to be offensive. So I went into this thing blind. I vaguely remember there's something about they shoveling all the dogs to an island, and this kid's going to go find his dog that was sent there. It's PG-13, so it is not made for children. That's important because I think a lot of the decisions made in here, people may try to excuse as like, well, you know, it's a kid's, but it's not a kid's film. The film starts out and, my God, the exposition. It is like, it's like watching a film and somebody is just like talking in your ear, and it's a 2-hour film. It's a 2-hour film of somebody telling you what's happening on screen while it's happening. And I'm not kidding, because there's like, the conceit is it's like 20 years in the future, but it's like this dystopian Japan, right? Which is clearly just Imperial Japan. And I'll get into that.
That's never been done before in film.
It is, I mean, down to the look. I'm like, that's not the future, dude. That's 1939. But anyway, it's much like reminiscent of Godzilla, like the American version, like William Burr, like going, oh my God, look, there's this monster out the way. It's huge. It's tearing up the city.
Who was doing that?
That was the best William Burr you've ever heard.
I've never heard of William Burr. That's the point.
You can't see this at home, but Jason's receiving a signal. A super secret podcast signal. Ray member.
That hand gesture is reserved for our marriage, Josh. I would like you to keep that inside the family.
Anyway, so it's literally the Cohen's wife. Was Norman? I can't remember her name, but she's like a propagandist telling you what you're watching the whole time. It's really annoying. On top of the constant exposition, there's like this. At the very beginning, it's like, all right, the dogs are going to speak English because that's their natural language, and Japanese will not be translated. It's like, oh, okay.
That is definitely not what they did. It said dog barks are translated to English.
Right. But they consciously didn't translate to Japanese. But then they had English people to
they said
talk.
That the Japanese would be translated by either electronic device or interpreter at times.
So you get this dystopian future, and these dogs are getting a disease, and they're all shipped to an island, basically be left for dead. This kid's dog gets taken, and so he takes a kind of rocket ship or plane that crashes on the island. It was a very the whole time I'm watching, I'm like, this is really at best ill-informed, at worst beyond cultural appropriation. It's like very derogatory towards Japanese, or at least inconsiderate towards their history, because you have this totalitarian regime that is sending people or dogs, but off to an island, being isolated. It had shades of things like the Bataan Death March and stuff. It really had that kind, and I was like, well,
so it's a comedy, is what you're saying.
It is. It seemed very tone deaf towards
genocide.
The recent in the recent history of Japan, it was either tone deaf or done unintentionally, which is bad, or it was done intentionally, which is just downright offensive. Like,
I'm going to go with Wes Anderson and intentionally.
Well, and I noticed that the name of his production company is
Genocide, pro genocide.
No, it's American Empiricism Films.
Are you kidding me?
Empiricism, but that's obviously a play on like empirical versus EM, but that's a play on empirical, like Empire. So I was like,
jeez.
All right, this is,
so
and I'm watching it.
In all seriousness, how did you, you're right about the teenager. Teenager wants to do something, you go do it. I get it. Did you pull the punches? Did you say nothing to her about it?
I didn't say a word. I said, I in fact,
you chickened out. You didn't be like,
no.
Let me explain to you the 100 different ways this movie sucks.
No, because because what's the point? And B, like as far as like raising my kids, I want them to have their own opinions.
Oh, you're a better man than
I just don't want to hear them.
Fair, yes.
When we watch crappy movies, periodically she'll be like, let's go watch this movie that I heard of at school. I'm like, cool. I go in cold. I don't read reviews or whatever. And we get in, and then after the movie's over, I'll Google it, and I'll see that it has a 0.5 stars review. It has like a 26 on Rotten Tomatoes. And I'm like, did you like that movie? And she's like, oh, I thought it was great. And I'm like, you have terrible taste in film.
I'm going to call your real father and let him know what kind of movies you're watching.
Ultimately, opinion is just that. So she likes things like Taylor Swift and stuff like that, but she'll also like, I'll hear the Smiths emanating from her room.
Yeah.
And I know that's my influence, but I know we're getting like way off into it, but it's life. They try to imprint that stuff. I expose them, but don't try to imprint.
Yeah.
You want to rework that?
I expose them to things that I like.
Yes. Now I'm there with you. It's a tough, because if you push too hard, they're immediately going to reject it.
Right. Like I'm the same way with philosophy and with politics. Like, I don't think my kids would be able to tell somebody what my political opinions are.
How interesting.
I do ask pertinent questions. I try to get them to think about things because I do want them to develop. It's more important to me that they believe what they believe and like what they like because they came to it honestly and through reflection rather than because somebody told them. And I also don't want them to react negatively to something. But of course, I also understand that they see how I live my life as an example, but that's different than telling them that that's what they need to do.
As an example or as a warning?
Typically a warning.
That's right.
Don't drink on Sunday morning.
No podcast, kid. Don't do a podcast.
Don't be like me. Don't be a podcast.
There's a traditional wisdom that your children, up until their age where they start doing their natural rebellion, usually around 13 or 14, there's this traditional wisdom that you are their first source of truth. Mm-hmm. And so it's imperative in those preteen years to establish your family values, your family morals, these are their hard lines in the sand, etc. And then because otherwise, if they're in a vacuum, without guidance, without these established morals, the very first person they think is cool who tells them something where you've not expressed an opinion, that becomes the new correct answer, basically. And so on big things, drug use, things like that, like big things, it matters that you get in early as a parent. But on like opinion things like art and music and film and taste and food and whatever, I kind of took the same approach where I was like, here's what I like, but you can like your own thing or whatever. This isn't like a hard line. This is an expression of taste. The weird thing that happened here is that my kid became like a snob about it. So like, we'll say I presented like 5 movies that I love. She'll reject 4 of them as like absolute trash, just like you. She'll be like, Adam, your taste is terrible. But your 5th movie, you accidentally serendipitously stumbled across a masterpiece that I don't understand how your brain could interpret as good based on your other examples here. And then she goes out and becomes an evangelist amongst her peers as if she discovered this thing. Like her dad had no say at all.
I don't think my kid really evangelizes what she likes. I think she keeps it to herself. We've been rewatching. She watched it when she was little, but she didn't really remember. We've been watching the new Doctor Who from Christopher Eccleston. I really don't try to push my opinion on her, but she got sick of David Tennant. It was really funny because I was like, well, yeah, imagine waiting a year to get to this next episode.
You're right.
Man needed to hang it up, right? And she like, but I allowed her to come to those conclusions herself. If I want to steer them, like when we talk about drugs and stuff, and I'll get back to the movie here in a second, but it's like, I will lay out the consequences of things. Like, personally, I know X, Y, and Z happened to people for contemporaries of mine. Do with that what you will. It's like, because they're smart enough to be like, oh, that sounds like bad mojo.
Raising teenagers is the hardest thing I've made. I can't. It's just terrible. It's just it's so hard.
All right, back to
our new podcast where we talk about parenting.
Bad dads.
Sad dads and bad dads. That's what we.
Yeah. So there's this weird Imperial Japan kind of dystopia. There's the Godzilla-like narration over it. It's 2 hours long. The kid that goes to the island to get his dog is Japanese, and he speaks very pidgin Japanese. And I read later about, because I was like, surely I'm not the only person that thought this. And so I sought out my peers on the internet and found that though this is a very well-received film, there was a lot of criticism towards cultural appropriation, and nobody hit on it quite from the angle I had, but there was concerns over the tone of the film and what it did. What's her name that directed Lady Bird?
Greta Gerwig.
Greta Gerwig plays a character. So I'm already concerned about the subtext that's going on here, and why is this set in Japan? Why are you doing this? And what is your intent? I think that you're just we'll put it in Japan. It'll be cool. I kind of got that vibe from it, and without thinking through the implications. And then there's an American exchange student played by Greta Gerwig, who is this little white girl with a huge blonde afro. And I was like, that's a choice. She's the one that starts a revolutionary movement against the oppressive government. And at one point, as she's inspiring all of the Japanese people to rise up against their oppressor, she does the Black Power fist. And she's got the afro. And I'm like, oh, I was like, okay, there's no way he doesn't understand that that's 1,000% cultural appropriation. It didn't get better. And so I looked it up. I was like, maybe this is based on a Japanese story. Nope. He wrote it, and Jason Schwartzman wrote the story. And I was like, ooh. I kept trying to find outs.
It's the antithesis of Kubo and the Two Strings. It's
yes. That's why I was like, oh, Kubo is a great kind of counterbalance to that, because it's everything that Kubo does right, this film does absolutely with wanton abandon wrong, on top of being pretentious and kind of boring. It's because his style is to have just the camera there, and everything's perfectly balanced, and you've got the character in the center, and they're saying their quirky dialogue. So I finished watching the film, and I was like, oh, wow, that may have been the worst Wes Anderson film I've ever seen. It literally veered into offense.
And then you looked over at your daughter, and she's like, that was such a good movie. Can we watch it again right now?
She was like, that was great. I was like, yeah. I said, that was a movie.
I don't know if you're a better dad or a worse dad than me, because when I do that, I'm like, oh my God, this is terrible. I immediately criticize it.
I looked at the IMDb reviews, and I started with the ones.
Validate that opinion.
Sure. Well, I wanted to see was this, am I crazy?
Am I crazy? Yeah, no, I've been there.
There were multiple people that were Korean or Korean descent that was like, hey, this brings this brings up some uncomfortable history between our two countries. And I was like, okay. And I searched the web, and there was actually several publications that were like, yeah, there's something not right about this film, and I don't think that this is the right person to make this story. Popularly, it was fairly well received, but there's definitely, I'm not the only person that had these criticisms. It was not a statistical anomaly that I thought these things, so it's very strange indeed. I do not recommend. Jason, your thoughts on
Well, I typically like Wes Anderson the more in his own world he gets in. So I do think his visual style, like you said, definitely lends itself better to animation.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think the story is good, but yeah, it's the setting, the using of Japanese culture, it's an unnecessary addition to the story. You could literally just have put it anywhere. I think he was even influenced by it because, like in London, there was a place called the Isle of Dogs. Like he saw a road sign for it. That's what threw him off of it. But yeah, I don't understand the choice of the Japanese or the use of the Japanese language or anything like that. Yeah, it's a head scratcher. I don't understand his choice of that. I think it does mar like the overall story of the film, which I think is a good story.
Yeah, it honestly is not a bad story. It's being someone who's aware of subtext, and that's the thing. It's like if Jerry Bruckheimer or
Michael Bay
made this film, I would just chalk it up to absolute ignorance. But I do not like Wes Anderson, but I do recognize him. I would say he's an auteur, and I think that he understands the art of film.
He's also no idiot. I mean, he's a smart person. He should know better.
It's harder for me to dismiss what I saw as accidental. And it very well could have been, just like, let's do this because it's kind of cool.
I think he's kind of got into that area where he believes his own hype because I'm not really a fan of him, but like I said, the more he gets into his own style, like, was it the Hotel Budapest? I think was a decent film, but the French Dispatch is terrible. And his last one that was the Astro City or whatever.
Oh, Rocket City or something like that? Or Asteroid City.
Asteroid City, yeah.
Yeah.
Apparently that's gotten pretty terrible reviews too. So I think he's kind of gotten into that funk of he thinks he can do anything he wants to do without, I guess, putting the work and the effort into it that he used to. And that's what this kind of seems like any just crazy idea that came to his mind. He just put it in the script and then put it on screen.
Yeah, and I think had he just made a few different choices, setting it someplace other than Japan or Asia in general, stay in your own.
For example,
house
Deep South Mississippi.
Yeah, that absolutely would have worked better. Absolutely. It just seemed very unaware. I think some of, the little girl character did. I mean, I hate to just bandy about words like cultural appropriation, but man, it's hard to ignore. And especially in a weird way, I think he thought he was like being clever about it. And it did not sit well with me. But removing all of that, the core of the story about a kid that loved a dog and a dog that loved him. And then the one character that was a stray who learns to reintegrate with society. Like he had a great backstory and stuff. Yeah. Like some of that stuff was good. And like the dog characters were fine. Like, and you spend a majority of the time with them, but there was just,
I think one of my favorite bits is the one voiced by Jeff Goldblum. A reoccurring bit with him is like, "Did you hear the rumor about so and so?" Like, yeah, that was another way they like dumped a lot of exposition or stuff in there. It's like and they even called it out. It's like, how do you hear all these rumors?
You heard the rumor, right, about Kobayashi Pharmaceutical?
I never heard it. What rumor? They invented dog flu.
No. Of course.
That makes sense.
Where do you get all these rumors? I mean, who tells them to you?
I don't know. Anybody dog's talking, I listen. Always have.
I love gossip.
Jeff Goldblum, he was very much in his element. It was weird having his quirky style, rapid dialogue through the dogs. It did work. Like, there were a lot of things in the film that worked, but I think the things that didn't work, and again, that's because I read into films more than probably the average person because I'm interested in film and things like that. But, like, if I watch a Paul Thomas Anderson film or I watch Martin Scorsese film, I know there's more going on than the surface. And I feel the same way with Wes Anderson. I'm giving him due here But that's when I'm like, if I give you your just due, this makes this like not cool, man. So I don't know. It was a strange experience for me because I did not expect that out of a Wes Anderson. I expected not to like it, but I didn't expect the subtext to be like, yeah. So I think watching The French Dispatch would be interesting because I wonder if there's the same kind of
blindness to culture.
Yeah. And I haven't seen the Grand Budapest Hotel or the Jeerling Limited, but those are films that deal with other cultures. Like, I wonder if that insensitivity is... I think that's what I have to chalk it up to. It's just cultural insensitivity, like not doing due diligence.
So at this point, I'd like to introduce our guest for the evening. Wes, are you on the line?
You son of a bitch. You're going to sit there and you're not going to say a word. You're going to hear me out. You smarmy, pretentious son of a...
You didn't let him finish, Josh. You didn't let him finish. It's Wes Peterson. Wes Peterson. We couldn't afford Anderson. He just
Wes Anderson's former roommate, Jeff Goldblum. Yeah, I mean the cast was really good. I get what he was trying to do with the not translating directly. I just don't think it worked. It wasn't Shogun. Put that on the marquee. So that is stop motion animation. If anybody ever asks you, can you tell me about stop motion animation? You now have an arsenal from which to pull
say no
random facts that may or may not be accurate. You can say, well, you heard the rumor, right? And when they ask you where you get the rumor from, you can say from the Brick Pit Podcast, the AAA source for movie analysis and parenting advice. If anyone wants to reach out to us, if you got a problem child or a question about film or a child with bad filmic taste.
You just want to watch Problem Child.
Yeah. Well, we will a free copy of Problem Child 2 to every person that emails us in the next 48 hours. Adam, how in fact would people reach us?
The best way to reach us is using our email address, brickpit@gmail.com. You can also find us on social media, searching the usual places where we may or may not be. We're most active on neither of the platforms that you would want to choose, and I won't even name them. The other way they can find us is going to our Linktree, which is Linktree/BrickPit, where they can find all the ways to reach us. If anyone wants to send us a voice recording or a voicemail of some kind, we will absolutely play that on air unless it's full of offensive comments, in which case we'll play it on air but edit it. And if you have anything particularly to say negative about Josh, you can send that to brickpit@gmail.com, and we will absolutely play it in, no matter whether it has curse words or not. It'll be a highlight of the evening for us. So until the next time.
And if you don't, we'll make him up for you.
That's right. We greatly appreciate all our listeners. Thank you, everyone who continues to support us. Until next time, this is the Brick Pit.